maintain high professional standards in the field of advertising. The topic which will be discussed today, that is portrayal of women in advertising, is an issue on which a lot has been discussed and debated about in the last few years. Today, to throw more light on this, Ms. Kapoor is going to discuss some very interesting findings of several studies which ASCI has conducted on this topic. So before I invite our eminent guest for the lecture, I request Dr. Rachna Sharma, Associate Professor with our institute, to formally welcome Ms. Manisha Kapoor on behalf of the entire IIMC fraternity. So Rachna ma'am, please.
A very good afternoon to all dignitaries. Before we start with the topic, I just have to discuss few points or questions coming to my mind. So when we take this topic, portrayal of women in advertising, we see that this is not a new topic. Right from 1970s, we see that an array of studies being conducted, if not particularly in the field of advertising, we see that at least in general, in terms of media portrayal of women, the issues started to emerge. So starting with John Berger, particularly when Berger said, men act and women appear. And lately in 1975, when Laura Mulvey presents us with the concept of male gaze, we see that the advertising field had been seen as a particular field for the researchers in terms of women portrayal. And moreover, when we look at this field, because it is not just connected with the business or the products, rather when we look at advertisements, we find the narratives are set. It goes with the storytelling. So it not only gives us with the simple portrayal, rather we look the field for representation of women for that matter. And moreover, when we look at that portrayal and representation, we see that sometimes the normative frames are re-emerged on the scene or reinstated even today. So we see that though we have seen a complete or say long journey of the issue in terms of how portrayal and women representations are done in the field of advertising, we also see that today the topic is still very relevant, contemporary in nature, because it and yet evolving. So we see that as we are living in an evolving world with new media technology and the dynamics, the changing dynamics of the field. So with this, we see that the field itself, or the topic or the theme of today's discourse, is also evolving in itself. So we have various dynamics and relationships today to explore. I think the council has done a great job in that field, because we do need researchers in the field, and the council is doing that for us, and it is somewhere easing where our way to understand the field. Being an academician, I can say that. So there are the questions of normative formation, and if we have counter formation in terms of narrative, and what expectations and aspirations the field presents in terms of women portrayal. Because when we talk about, let me quickly give you one example, because whenever we see those advertisements, we have certain questions into mind, particularly in terms of narrative, in terms of textual analysis, or in terms of interpretation drawns, because again, in terms of storytelling, those are open to meaning making and various multiple interpretations. So how do we see that question of interpretation, first of all? And when it comes to the dynamic of, say, business relationship, because we all know we are living in the era of multinationals, global world where global companies are coming up. They come up with their idea of consumers, and there are cultural sensitivity at question, we can say. So looking at all those questions, the business consumer, or you can say business cultural dynamism in terms of relationship, consumer company relationship, and gender equations at large, we need to be involved into a dialogue. And that is why today we are organizing this dialogue. So this is not a verdict from one researcher's perspective who sees the things from a critical perspective always, to include the holistic meaning, or to understand it better. I welcome Ms. Manisha Kapoor on the floor on behalf of IIMC fraternity. Because she is one of the authorities certainly on the topic, and we are going to learn a lot through her experience, we can say. We are going to enrich our knowledge base. So welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Professor Rachna. Absolutely an honor for me to be amongst all of you today. And yeah, very, very happy and delighted to participate in this forum. Thank you so much for your kind words.
Okay, thank you, Rachna ma'am. So before I formally invite our eminent speaker for the lecture, so there's an announcement for the students that the floor for question and answer session will be open after the lecture. So you are required to ask your questions through the chat box and keep your mic mute. Okay, so before we proceed further, let me introduce the speaker of today. So Ms. Manisha Kapoor, prior to her engagement as Secretary General of ASCI, ASCI in 2020 had a long innings as a professional brand strategist and consultant to business and organizations. She started her career with Unilever and then was associated with Johnson & Johnson. Thereafter, Ms. Kapoor extensively consulted in various capacities with local and global brands across diverse sectors, including several non-profit ventures. In taking over the role at ASCI, she has tried to widen the organization's outlook from policing the narrative to help in shaping it. To stay relevant and vibrant, ASCI is rapidly adapting to demands of the future through collaboration, thought leadership, future-facing initiatives, and embracing technology. It's indeed a great pleasure to have you here, ma'am. And now I formally request you to deliver the lecture. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for that, Nisa. And, my thanks to Professor Pramod Kumar and Professor Dwivedi for calling me here today. It's, I've had a couple of interactions, of course, with Professor Pramod Kumar. I have been interacting in the past, and absolute pleasure to be amongst all of you. And I hope what I have to share will be of some interest and use to all of you over here. May I request that the presentation deck be shared on screen?
Okay, ma'am. Just give me a minute.
Yeah.
Is it visible, ma'am?
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, it's visible. Yeah. So I'll take you today through a study that we did recently, and I think as Professor Rachna was saying earlier that, this is not in that sense a new undiscovered topic. It has been a matter of debate for a few decades now in different shapes and forms. And I think one of the key things is that, one is to say that what has happened, and yet, so what has changed and what has not changed, because it's not that there has been no change. There has been a change, and what is that change? And also from an ASCII perspective, while of course so advertising is only one of the various content available, that depict women. So it's not just advertising, of course, it's film, it's other kinds of content, it's television, it is different kinds of portrayals of women. But it's important to look at advertising as well, because advertising is a part of that ecosystem. And also because advertising tends to be, if you think of ourselves as consumers of advertising, it is really incessant, right? I mean, it does not stop. It surrounds us today. We can't escape it. And therefore, it has a very important role, to play, and kind of contributes or takes away from, the way in which women are thought of in society, the way that women's aspirations are reflected. And that's something that we tried to, undertake through this study, which we did last year. If I can move to the next slide, please. Yeah. So why should we do this? Why did we undertake this study? So if you look at any kind of research, that was happening in the recent past, I think it really demonstrated that there was what we call a real tectonic shift in the way that women are imagining themselves and their place in the world. And this is something which we've seen accelerate in the last few years, and it is primarily due to the access to technology, the ability to have a platform to voice their own opinions, the ability to be able to broadcast themselves in the way that they think they are kind of wanting to appear in front of the world. So this is something which is, a very, very big change. And, we wanted to kind of examine this in some detail. So advertising seems to reflect some of these changes, but at the same time, it seems to be a little short of the new realities in society. And therefore, we kind of felt the need to study this in a little bit more detail. And we were looking at change that would actually help to create a roadmap also for, newer thinking, etc., and not just kind of, look at just technical research or, what is actually happening. So this was something interesting that we decided to kind of take up, as a study. Yeah, we can go to the next slide, please. One of the interesting things that we did as part of Gender Next is that it was a multi-inquiry approach. Typically, when we do research, वो या quantitative हो जाता है या qualitative हो जाता है या हम experts से मिलते हैं. I mean, this we really decided to go with a very open agenda, and we decided to do several things. We said that we don't want to understand this topic only from one perspective. We want to understand it from multiple perspectives. So the first thing that we did was we actually started to look at ads. So we looked at over 600 ads, and each of those ads were looked at for what the visual vocabulary was, what the audio was, what was being unsaid, what was happening in the foreground, what was happening in the background. What were the ways in which change was kind of demonstrated, how were brands taking certain stances, on different issues. So there was a big kind of reading of advertising itself. And we looked at recent advertising, so not iconic or historical advertising, because that has its own kind of understanding. But we looked at advertising really in the last 5 to 6 years. So we did that. We also did comparative media mapping, which is we looked at a lot of television shows. We looked at, how are women characters portrayed in those shows. I mean, and that's supposed to be kind of the leading, more inspiring kind of shows. And also we did not do a full analysis of the show, but we analyzed what was changing about them. So we really looked at the notes of change to understand, what are the things which are kind of coming to the forefront, what is at the cusp of change, because I think what is traditional has been studied a lot. We of course did consumer immersion. We spoke to consumers across over 10 centers. This was also done during the second wave or just out of the second wave, of COVID. So, we were, I think this was a very tough act for us to pull off, but I think we managed to do that. We supplemented it also by doing a lot of online work, with men and women on social media. And we had in-depth conversation with around 140 women. We exposed a lot of ads. So we ran ad clinics for them where we showed them some advertising, understood their responses and reactions. We also met with a lot of other stakeholders, because advertising is not just between the industry and the consumer. There is the government, there are policymakers, there are, domain experts in the area of gender. There is a lot of civil society interest in this topic. So a lot of their views were also considered. We also met with people who are stakeholders from the industry, the people who are making the ads, the people who own these brands. What do they feel? So for example, a lot of them felt कि नहीं ये हम progressive तो दिखाते हैं पर वो किसी city में तो चल जाता है पर जो हमारा consumer है वो rural है तो इसलिए हम थोड़ा traditionally दिखाते हैं. So what were the kind of pulls and pushes in their minds, or what they were considering when they were making advertising, so that we understood this the context holistically before saying, okay, go guys, this is what you should be doing, without understanding actually what their objectives were. We have to remember that advertising is not people don't do it for charity, they do it for building business. And if they have to build business, if they feel this is the best approach to get consumers, then they will do it, and we can't infringe upon that right. So how do we show them new starting points which also work for the brand but are also great for consumers and society? So I think that was the attempt in this study. We also drew upon, so we went with a partner called Future Brands, and they have a study called Bharat Darshan, which is an ongoing study on socio-economic change in India, socio-cultural change in India, and they've done the study for about 10 years. So that provided a very good context of the overall change in women over a long period of time, against which we could look at advertising, and focus on that. So we also created what we call a stereotype inventory. We looked at 5 big categories. We looked at beauty, fashion, personal care. We looked at food and home. We looked at finance and education, where even the absence of women makes a statement, right? We looked at gadgets and wheels. We also looked at categories that primarily targeted men. How are women portrayed in those categories, which, where men are the primary consumers of those? So I'll share a few key findings, about the study. So one of the things that, I think really kind of stood out after we did our work was what we call the tyranny of the implicit. Ki jo stubborn stereotypes actually sometimes on first and second viewing actually are not immediately apparent, but they reveal themselves through patterns. So if you start seeing advertising, advertisement after advertisement, you will suddenly notice these patterns, which are there in one ad and they may not stand out, but when you see across categories, across decades, the same stereotypes are there, then you realize that these are so implicit that we have all collectively developed a blind spot for it, whether as consumers, whether as advertisers, whether as people who are watching this space. And it's almost like every category has a key frame of an unchanging imagination. So, one of the jokes is that a tray in an ad is always held by a woman. Okay, and if you think of it now, you think of hundreds of ads where you'll nod your heads and say, "Haan, ye humne dekha hai." Okay, film opens on a dining table where the husband is reading the Economic Times and the wife is chopping vegetables. It has nothing. It could be a banking ad. It could be an ad for a kitchen product. It could be an ad for home cleaning. It could be anything. But so many of these ads have these frames which don't stand out, but they are there and they remain so stubbornly enforced and reinforced as part of advertising. Some diversity we have started seeing advertisers bring in, whether it's on skin color, whether it is on age, yet especially in beauty ads, yet each of them is like beautiful. I mean, even if we show a slightly older woman, it'll be like that the top end of beauty. It'll be the most beautiful woman in her 40s or 50s that you will see. There's no representation of the average woman in advertising. And even if it is a non-beauty ad, the mother in the kitchen is always so spick and span. Even the kitchen is so spick and span. And that's, of course, it's not to say that advertising does not have to consider its own set of aesthetics, and it can and it should. But the challenge happens is that when ad after ad you see the same aesthetic, then it becomes something which you're saying, okay, then this, you're kind of over a period of time. It's like, these are these drip effect of advertising, what we call that drop by drop, each drop is reinforcing the same thing. So that becomes a problem. And therefore you are unable to shrug off some expectations on traditional feminine roles, even when you're saying that, the choices being made are new, and yet you will find that, it goes back to actually being made in a very traditional way. And I'll take you through some examples of these. The other interesting thing is that, even progressive advertising, so ads which set out to be progressive actually also stumble. Women are always shown free to do more, but not free to do less. So if there is a doctor in an ad, when she comes back home, she still has to look after her family. Okay, so you will say, acha, ye to humne doctor dikha diya, see, we are showing progressive women. we are showing women in non-traditional roles. But then she comes back and she has to cook for the family. She comes back, she has to take care of the family. So you are loading women with burdens, and that is being normalized through advertising. कि वो इतनी सक्सेसफुल है लेकिन घर आके मतलब उसका घर फिर भी स्पिक एंड स्पैन है एंड उसका खाना पूरा टाइम से टेबल पे लगता है और वो 10 चीजें भी बनाती है घर में. What are these unrealistic expectations that we are trying to set? Other interesting thing is this infantilizing or glorifying of men and women in non-stereotypical roles. You would have seen some ads where a man is making food. Okay, now that is so-called progressive advertising. But look at the energy and drama around it. As the whole house is applauding कि भाई इसने एक कप चाय का बना दिया. अब उसमें क्या बड़ी बात हो गई? Why are you showing something as an exception rather than normalizing it and showing it as something that, yes, I mean, why can't men make tea? I mean, it is not difficult for anyone of any age or gender to make tea. So why is that unnecessary glorification of that? Conversely, when a woman takes part in household finances, you glorify her as if she's a devi. Koi zarurat nahi hai. Just show it as normal, because most normal women are doing that and they're doing it in a very normal way. So that's what happens, that in your mind, you have set out to make an advertisement which is very progressive, but at the same time, by glorifying, you are presenting it as such an exception that it needs to be celebrated abnormally. Okay. The other interesting thing again in progressive advertising is that there's a tendency to celebrate the bestower of freedom. So often the father or the husband or the male siblings, कि हमने अपनी लड़की को बाहर जाने दिया. I mean, why is the permission needed to do something normal? And therefore an ad, especially you'll see a lot of Women's Day ads like this, which are celebrating the allowing of what is actually very basic freedoms. I mean, really, there should be no need for permission for a woman to go out, meet with her friends, to study further. Why should all of these be that? So why are we again glorifying these things as such exceptions, right? And a lot of hollow depiction of female empowerment, through styling rather than through work. So if you want to show a woman doctor, have you ever seen in any ad a woman doctor being actually shown as a doctor? A woman doctor is always shown as a mother. So it is you're only styling for the sake of saying that you have empowered her. Have you seen women at work in advertising? Have you seen the workplace? Even at the workplace, she's actually doing something else, or talking about the product or this thing. Have you ever seen her in a professional capacity in any ad? Very few. Okay, so these are some of the challenges that even when advertising tries to be progressive, it is stumbling back on certain very stereotypical ways of being progressive also. Yeah, we can go to the next slide, please. So this is what I was speaking of earlier, that there is a new generation of advertising, but that dramatizes challenges and stereotypes. It does not normalize progress. It puts women on a pedestal, or it celebrates the archetypical roles around gender, which is like self-sacrificing, all forgiving, and it rarely normalizes these signs of change. And that is a big problem, because if you don't show these as normal things, then it will always remain an exception, and therefore people will feel that these are exceptional things, ye hamesha nahi ho sakta hai. And that is where you're kind of creating a specific barrier. Yes, we can go to the next slide, please. Also, a weak role of her surround in aiding progressive depictions. The task of connoting progress seems to be falling only upon the women characters. Less attention is paid to the words and actions of those around her. What is a family doing in that situation? What is a husband doing? What are the children doing? So many ads we see, the woman is working hard, the mother, father, the in-laws, or the children are all sitting and watching TV. Why? What are the actions of those around the women? Are they part of a unit, or is she serving them? So is she in service of her family, versus is this really a family coming together? So what are we trying to show? Even when women are themselves seen as moving forward, they seem to be doing so alone, without the corresponding movement of the family happening around her, And if you talk to women, a lot of them say that progress is everyone's progress. It's not her at the expense of someone else, but she also doesn't want others to progress at her expense. So it has to be collective progress. Now that is again something that advertising is not showing too much of. Okay, and advertising, remember, that does not speak to the woman alone, but it speaks to society, and yet it builds progressive models for women to aspire to, but does not build progressive models for husbands, in-laws, children to follow. And then how is this woman going to progress if everyone around her is where they are? And that's not possible, right? So some tropes, if we see from the home and food care, so these you will see again and again, happening. woman washing dishes, smiling, making 10 things in food, smiling, jhadu kar rahi hai, smiling. Which woman smiles when she's doing all these things? You know, you're showing smilingly at the service of everyone. What is so great about washing dishes? I mean, I've not seen anyone in my life smiling when they wash dishes, you know. So why are we showing that women are enjoying drudgery? They don't. Okay. This is again, a second one is very common, this whole space forsaking to male celebrities. You've seen so many of these toilet cleaner ads where a celebrity comes, वो घर में चौड़ा आके आता है और woman को बोलता है आपका toilet clean नहीं है. भाई कौन हो तुम ये बताने वाले? और why are the women listening to him and why are they being instructed by men who have no idea about how these things are? Are you an expert? No, you're not. So this whole space forsaking, that someone can enter your house and dictate to you how you must do things. What is happening to the hierarchy of, what are you showing? What are you trying to show through these ads? What is the unsaid message that is happening? If you see a lot of voiceovers happen in categories where the male is talking, even though those categories ads may be aimed at women. So, because the voice of the expert is often a male voice. Central yet backgrounded, you will see a lot of food ads where the mother has made the food, where your last frame mein hoga, the full family is together, mother kitchen mein at the background. If you think of so many food ads, you will be able to see that. So she's central to the plot and she's central to the category, but she's backgrounded when the family comes together. She's an observer of a family's happiness and not a participant in it. And she's not an equal participant in that joy that she has helped to create. Costumed in modernity. काम वही करती है, किचन में वही काम करती है, खाली अब पैंट शर्ट पहन के काम करेगी, पर काम वही कर रही है. So you have only shown progress through costumes and not really in the nature of the work or how she does the work or how she's supported by others in doing her work. Okay, a lot of what is also called humor hedging. If at all women are shown as being independent or, like speaking up their mind, it is always couched in humor. ताकि किसी बाकियों को किसी को बुरा ना लगे. So you are also trivializing the few instances of independence or her ability to answer back or her ability to be angry and have other emotions than just being smilingly at the service of others. So this is a big thing. In beauty and fashion tropes, I think Rachna ma'am kind of alluded to this gaze acceptance, that a woman is happy when people look at her and think she is beautiful. I don't think in real life we would want any of this. So for example, there was a very interesting ad where this woman by mistake, instead of getting into a taxi, gets into somebody else's car at the signal or whatever, and then this person looks back and he smiles at her and she also smiles back. Arey bhai, kaun karta hai ye? Matlab, why are you accepting a stranger's gaze? In real life, it would be so scary that you would run out of the car. You would not accept that gaze. But in advertising, you are forever accepting everyone's gaze on you. Of course, I think the next one I don't need to speak about too much. Seeding self-doubts, where beauty products make a woman feel bad about her skin, her color, her hair, her body shape, about everything that she does. Also mute muses and lost beauties. I mean, how many ads we've seen are just women staring into space and there is an ode, which is also the male gaze on the woman. It's the man's gaze on the woman, even in a beauty product. Also, for example, we saw in the jewelry category, where the woman goes and, they're all buying jewelry for her, but she has no voice in the entire process. Even the salesman in the shop has an opinion, but she has not said anything in the entire ad. So these are some examples of, where we see beauty and fashion. In automotive, finance and gadgets, in credit card ads, for example, you will always see women with shopping bags. And it is only starkly different because the men are never shown like that. So it is a whole spender syndrome that when it comes to even categories like finance, I mean, women are shown as spenders, rather than people who can invest. And even, I mean, it's fine. I mean, women will spend, but so do men. So it's just that, you have a different way of viewing how women are represented in advertising. And therefore, advertising also obscures financial burdens borne by women. It does not kind of normalize women earning, contributing to, we don't see this in too many ads. At the most, we will see an ad, again, where she's kind of, put on a pedestal for buying a car for her parents or buying some insurance for her family. She does not need to be put on that pedestal. Many women do it as a normal part of their everyday lives. If it's in an ad for a car, she's shown as childlike delight. It's like almost you've infantilized her relationship with the vehicle. It's not normal where she can take and drive off. Also paired with auspiciousness, or nariyal phone zarur aa jayegi ek car ke ad mein. Then new functionalities, but same responsibilities. If you show a woman interacting with technology, it is to order food for the children, or it is to find a more efficient way of ordering groceries. She's not doing anything new, even with technology. And body double for gadgets. We see that in ads which talk about features of gadgets, they use men. Where they talk of the aesthetics of the product, they use women. So you will see this pattern when you start to notice all these ads. Yeah? We can go to the next slide, please. And if you talk to women themselves, women of today, and particularly I think young women, I'm sure many of them are in the audience today, that they feel that actually they can progress when society catches up with their thinking. Most women feel that we are already ahead. They are pointing out that society is the one which is lagging behind. Hum already apne mind mein we have crossed that bridge. We have gone that distance, but there is no distance there is no progress when it comes to others. And there is an empowerment ad which seems more cathartic rather than empowering. So they feel ki chalo ye advertising dikhaya, it's very emotional, ye wo whatever, but it does not seem to be empowering. It just seems to be cathartic. Collective movements of women seem more aspirational, than receiving compliments. So they feel that, yes, I would rather see what is being done to women. How are women behaving today? Those become much more aspirational than just receiving a compliment. So women are also kind of, thinking of their own progress in these different ways. And there is a self-reliance which is rooted not in financial independence alone, but just in an inner fire, a belief that the woman can do what she wishes to do. And, there is this, like I said, this whole desire for collective progress. It is not progress at the expense of anyone else, but neither does she want others to progress at her expense. So it is this desire for collective progress and the desire to see freedoms and choice accessed with ease. And again, a lot of these Women Day ad, they will show a woman struggling. Uske baad wo kahin jaake usko thoda kuch milta hai. Young women of today are saying, we don't want to struggle to, just be able to study or just go out. I mean, this should be normal. We should be able to access our freedoms and choices without struggling for it. Always don't make us struggle for our freedoms. Yeah. Importantly, women also see advertising as an ally in her progress. So they are saying कि ये अच्छा है. Advertising जब हम साथ में बैठ के देखते हैं, तो ये जो मेरे भाई बैठे हैं पास में, या मेरे फादर बैठे हैं, या जो मेरे कोई elderly mother या relative बैठी हैं, कि इनको भी पता चलता है कि बाकी जगह कैसे होता है काम. So it is a nudge for her family and her society to normalize progress. So they tell us ये अच्छा ad है, ये ना हमारे भाइयों को देखना चाहिए. It is normal to do all of this. So they are also using advertising as an ally to create certain impressions, of advertising, and it is helping them to catch up with women. Yes, we can go to the next slide, please. And so this is a study that we've done, and of course, I'm very happy to share, any details with you that might interest all the students. But what we have developed is also a model, and it is not just in the creation of advertising, but it is how advertising imagines women, because that's how it will get portrayed. So it is a model to develop more empathy while creating the ad, and also to aid. So we have tried to develop, a model. I'll just take you through the next slide, which has some details on the model. Yeah. So what we call is a sea change. I mean, it's an SEA model, so we call it a sea change model. And the top of the iceberg, which is, and as you all know that, the bottom of the iceberg is much larger, much more prevalent. It is the top of the iceberg, which can be more deliberate. So the top of the iceberg tells you how women can be portrayed in advertising. And these are the things to keep in mind, which is self-esteem. How does a woman feel about herself in that ad? Is she feeling in control? Is she feeling confident of her decisions? Or is she feeling anxious? What is your advertising fueling? Is it fueling anxiety, or is it contributing to her confidence? So how does a woman feel about herself in the portrayal that you have shown? The second is how the woman empowered, which is how the woman feels in relationship with the situation she is cast in. Does she have the decision-making power? Does she have a voice at the table? Is she an equal partner? Is she, are there hierarchies around her? So what is happening in terms of how she finds herself in a situation? Does she see herself as not having a voice, or having some control and being able to kind of lead the decision in those situations? The third is allied. What are the others doing around her? So it's not just important to show the woman as progressive. It is also important to show other members of the society and her family as being her allies in those progress. No one can progress if others are not progressing at the same pace. So how Let's say, and why always show a mother-in-law trying to bring her daughter-in-law down? Or why always show a husband who is kind of unhappy with his wife's cooking? Why? And why always show children who are expecting the house to be clean while they are going about their jobs? So if you don't show everyone else coming together to work as a unit together, or colleagues at work, are they trying to tell her ki you have to stay late, or you have to do this work, or you're not capable of doing this work, etc. So are they being shown as partners in her progress? That is something for advertisers to think about. The 3S screener, which is the part which is below the iceberg, as it were, is really, these are the stereotypical depictions that come in, okay, which we call subordination, service, and standardization. So subordination is where the woman is placed lower in hierarchy in the decision-making progress. And this can happen, a lot of what happens, below this iceberg, as we say, is actually sometimes not even central to the plot of the film or the ad. I mean, it is just by default, it creeps in, right? So how are women placed in the decision of hierarchy of decision making? Service, I think we touched upon this. Is the woman always shown in service of others? Whether it is her colleagues, or whether it is her family, or whether it is any other members of society, versus collectively doing things. And the third is what we call standardization, which she's looking in a certain way, and there's a standardization of looks, that a mother of 2 children in the kitchen will look like this. You don't see any diversity in body types, in color, of skin, of age. All women who have 2 children, young children, must only be 28 to 30. Who says? I mean, that's not the real world. So there is no diversity which is being shown, and therefore you have standardized women into certain molds in terms of their depiction. This is how it should look. A girl going out to college must look like this. A teenage girl sitting at home must look like this. There is very little diversity and representation of, different types of women in different roles. So this becomes, and therefore what you're doing is you're blurring individuality. I mean, she's then just a prop to be used, in the whole effort. So, I wanted to keep a little bit more time for questions and discussions. And I would encourage all of you to kind of visit our website, askionline.in, where you can access a full copy of the report. There are many, many more interesting things in the report, but I wanted to make sure that we have enough time for question answers, debates, and discussions, especially with young people as yourself. I would love to hear about what you think of advertising and the depiction of women, or any other things in advertising. So I'll stop now, and be happy to take your questions, comments, feedback on this.
Thank you, ma'am, for really, really insightful session, and presented in a very interesting and a very simple manner. I mean, this is an issue which isn't complex in itself, but the way you presented it, it was like very helpful for us. So now the floor is open for the question and answer session, and I would request students to actively participate in it. So can we have our first question for the session in the chat box, please? Students, you can chat your questions in the chat box.
The first question always takes time.
Yes, definitely. Before that, I think, Manisha ji, you can comment on how media coverage on different issues basically depict women.
Sorry, by media coverage, do you mean
media? How women are depicted in news stories or features, etc., by the media?
Okay, so one of the things that we did also as part of this study was that we actually looked at the top performing programs, in different languages across the country, and like I mentioned earlier, that what we were looking for, what were the notes of change, not so much as what was constant. So while of course a lot of it remains constant, what we did find, in terms of media content, is that there is a change, and you are seeing women who are taking on new roles, who are much more in decision-making capacity, who are, taking certain bold decisions, who are leading, the conversation in their homes, who are working closely with their family, and even in the family dynamics, so earlier, for example, and like I said, we are looking at notes of change, so I would not say that everything has changed entirely, but you do see women, for example, dressing up not only in traditional ways but also in newer ways. You do see women kind of voicing their opinions on things that matter to them. So I think those are the notes of change. I think, like everything, it may not be mainstream yet, but I think you do see those notes of change, and I think that is something which, advertising also, you see notes of change, but unfortunately we see most of mainstream advertising is still very rooted in some of these stereotypes.
One more question is, Manisha ji, you are conducting a lot of studies in ASCI.
Yes.
What are those? Particularly, what are the topics of those studies? I was told by somebody that you have conducted a study on fake advertisements also.
Yeah, so we, as ASCI, of course, our main job is to look at advertisements, and that they need to be honest, that they need to be non-offensive, they need to be not promoting something which is harmful for individuals or society, and they need to be what we call fair in competition, that they can be competitive, but they must not unfairly denigrate another product, or make an unfair comparison. So that is the bulk of the work that we do. And from time to time, and so, but this is pretty much a major part of the work we do, and we get not so much as fake advertisements, but what I would call misleading advertisements, is where there is a claim being made, where the claim is fake, or the claim is not fully substantiable by the evidence that the advertiser may have. So, for example, last time in last couple of years, COVID has kept us very busy. You had a lot of products claiming to reduce the incidence of the virus, and in some cases they could prove it, but in several other cases, like you had air conditioners, fans, wall paints, even a mobile app, which all claim to protect people from corona. And so a lot of those kind of advertisements we took up and asked them to modify it. So that's the mainstream work that we've done. Okay, so let me take, I think a couple of questions have come. We have very few progressive ads being shown on TV. Even when brands do, it is met with its own share of controversy. Try to portray gender inclusivity, then how would advertisers incorporate change when the audience becomes so dismissive? So I think there are a couple of things. One is that there is what I would say, where advertising is intending to be progressive. And it's also that I think brands must realize and decide whether this is something that they want to stand behind. We also see sometimes brands take on something just because it's a fad, or it'll become nice to say, or it'll get us some attention. Whereas actually the moment there is a controversy, they kind of back out, because that's not an issue that they have been kind of standing behind. I would say Tanishq is an exception. I think throughout their ads, they have been kind of portraying certain, breaking of stereotypes in different ways, not just gender, but other kinds of stereotypes as well. And throughout, I mean, not just, one or two ads, but you've seen that kind of consistently being done. I think in the particular case that you're referring, I think it became a law and order issue, where someone kind of, took the brand manager's name and put it on social media. And I think that is a law and order issue, which, and advertisers must feel safe. You may not agree with all advertising, but it cannot become a law and order issue, to have freedom of expression. And that is something that our constitution guarantees. And I think that's somewhere where I feel the authorities, should have and did step in. But in general, progressive ads, even if they get their share of controversy, I think if the brand's intent is well, is well researched, is well intentioned, I think those debates and those, those debates are healthy. So long as the debates are healthy, so long as there is a certain provocation, I don't think that there is anything wrong with it. So long as it is done in a manner that is, not offensive, and not done in a manner that is, kind of looked upon by someone. So I personally don't think that there is anything wrong with that.
Ma'am, there is a second question as well in the chat box. It reads, how do you think advertisers can be pushed to not depict women in stereotypical roles?
Yeah. So one of the interesting, I think, things is that we look at different kinds of advertisements, and sometimes we are ourselves, as consumers, may not realize that what we are following is something which is very stereotypical. It's difficult to identify also the stereotypes, unless you have studied a certain pattern in it, and sometimes casual viewing does not reveal stereotypes. So I think it needs a lot of education. It needs a lot of dialogue on this issue. It needs a lot of coming together of different kind of stakeholders and interest groups to take this conversation further. It's obviously not something that can be done overnight. It needs a change. There has been change, but yes, how do we accelerate the change? To my mind, the most powerful way in the way that this change gets accelerated is that if young women start rejecting the brands that are showing them in stereotypical roles and start preferring brands that show them in more progressive roles. At the end of the day, if the consumer's preference is for roles and is for ads that are more progressive, and if consumers like brands, and consumers aspire to brands that are more progressive, I think that is the strongest kind of pivot around which advertising could change, because finally when it makes business sense, and I think there are enough studies that show that progressive depiction in advertising is good for business. People tend to like those ads, people try to remember those brands, and people aspire to those. So I think that's the interesting kind of conversation where young women themselves and people who are kind of interested in this field are able to look at more progressive advertising, and where there is a consumer pushback itself on these depictions. So I think that is really the long-term way in which this change will happen. We have to keep doing things like what we are doing today. We are having this conversation. If there are thousands and thousands of such conversations in the country, I'm very, very confident that things will change.
So as we wait for more questions, certain faculties who have joined us, like Dean Academics, Professor Govind Singh sir, he is here. Sangeeta ma'am is here. I can see Sanjeet sir to be here. So I would request them that if they want to add any comment to this discussion, or if they want to go ahead with a question, so they are most welcome. If any comment or any remark you want to put forward, please, sir.
Manisha ji, I'm Professor Sangeeta Pranavendra. I just had a query. We revel and feel happy when women are depicted in a strong, decisive role in advertisements. Is it because they are now financially independent, or they are actually calling the shots? Did your study bring about such a thing? Or is it just the fact that they are now financially independent, they have a say in what to buy, and so they are shown as decision makers and women in control?
Yeah, so interesting question, Professor Sangeeta, and I think it's a bit of both. So I think, so one is that women, even if they're not financially independent, I think have what we see across the country, have a certain way in which they are viewing themselves now and the role that they are playing. So even if they're not financially independent, she sees herself in a certain light and with a certain esteem towards herself, which is saying that if I'm doing some work at home, it has some value. I want to be appreciated for what I'm doing, and I don't just want to kind of do this and no one notices my drudgery. So there is that whole, expectation and demand that she has of others to see her and for her not to be invisible anymore. And whether it is being financially independent, it definitely adds to, I think, a certain voice or authority that she may have. But I'm saying that in the absence of that, it is not as if there is such a contrast between women who are working and women who may not be financially independent. So that's what I'm saying. So to my mind, it actually transcends financial independence, that women today are not willing to be invisible in their own homes as well. If she makes something, she wants that acknowledgement from her family that yes, I have made this, and so I think that whole invisibility of labor, which so many of women over decades and over generations have kind of faced, I think that is not okay with her anymore. And even if she's not doing a job or she's not earning, there is an entrepreneurial spirit in her, that she is not sitting, she's adding value. For example, even if she's to make something, she will look at 3 YouTube videos and do something. Or, she tries to understand what is the latest in, in a certain area. Agar bachche ko padhana bhi hai, to wo uske upar online research karke kuch kar rahi hai. She's talking to other people to get inputs. So there is an entrepreneurial energy in women of India today. And that is what is giving them that confidence and that ability to look at themselves in some way as professionals, even if they're not financially independent. So I think that is a big change.
But aren't some advertisements creating a paradox? Like there's this advertisement where a woman tells her male subordinates in office that they have to finish a presentation and then they can go home. She goes back. She's shown calling her own husband. The husband says, I have a tough boss. She goes to cooking, and the man she's calling is the one who was being dictated by her in office. So isn't that a role conflict? She goes back to the cooking, even she's going home late. She's waiting for him to have meal. I mean, like, all these are very cliched presentations, aren't they?
Absolutely, I agree with you. So I'm saying that sometimes what happens is that, which is what we were discussing, that even progressive ads, sometimes stumble and go back to what is more traditional. So another example I was giving, that someone's using technology, but women are using technology to order food. I mean, you can also use technology to do other things, right? So somewhere, and that's what we were saying, that women are shown as free to doing more, but not free to do less. So aap kar rahe ho ghar pe kaam, very good, but ghar pe aake chapati bhi aap hi banaoge. So it is, we are in fact burdening women more and more, and we are normalizing this extra burden, which is saying that you are now expected to manage everything flawlessly. And, and you do not see the same expectations, let's say, being put upon men in advertising. When they are coming home, there is still someone to serve them tea, and there is still someone to kind of, give them food. And that may not be the case with the woman. So you're absolutely right that these are the kind of cliches, that advertising falls into. And they're very, very stubborn. And, on first viewing, it does not even appear to be anything abnormal, or one doesn't even notice that there could be this thing which is not quite right about it. So.
Thank you, ma'am, for taking that. And slowly the questions are pouring in. So we have another question in the chat box. And it asks that how can we change this typical patriarchal mentality of gender inequality in advertising industry in today's era?
Yeah, so I think there are several things to be done. I think one is, just more women also in the area of advertising itself, in production, in creation of advertisements. So you have more and more women creative directors, you have more and more women filmmakers, script writers. That brings a different gaze, or that brings a different, spotlight to how women are portrayed. So that becomes one important aspect. I think the kind of conversations we are having today, need to happen within the industry for us to show a light to the industry, saying that, look, these are some problem areas, and take a look, because women are your consumers. I mean, most advertising in India is aimed at women, and here's your most important consumer constituency, that you want these women to love your brand and to love your advertising. Please get your act together and show them in ways that they find aspirational and not ways in which they find problematic. So, for example, a lot of young girls, when they see ads of foods, food products, they take a look and say, "Hamari ye life ho jayegi shaadi ke baad, this is not acceptable." So I'm saying that you are yourself creating a barrier between you and your audiences. So how does that make any business sense? So I think that study after study has shown that progressive advertising also makes for good business sense. And I think, at least if, that's a logic that the industry should have no problem in understanding. Therefore, so it is a matter of, I think, just being awakened and being conscious of the fact that, yes, sometimes these stereotypes creep in. For example, we've looked at this framework. Now, for example, if advertisers were to look at this framework and say, okay, every time I make an ad, let me check vis-a-vis this framework whether, I can tick some of these boxes, or, what are the problem areas. So I think there is a lot of support. There are a lot of resources for industry. And I think the industry must realize the business case for progressive advertising and do it. And I think that will take care of any kind of mindset faster than anything else that we can do. So I think the business case for progressive advertising is very, very strong, and that will help.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Another question lined up is by Anushka Bharadwaj, and she asks, good afternoon, ma'am. How should the people in advertising agency maintain a balance so that an advertisement holds relatability with all the sections of the society, especially women? Because idea of empowerment changes very quickly depending upon a lot of factors prevailing in the society.
Yeah, so I think this is a question which also a lot of advertisers have, saying that, Acha, my audience is a small town village girl, or, small town woman, etc., etc. So, usko kaise hum progressive dikhayenge? You talk to small town women today, I mean, I think they are bursting with entrepreneurial energy. Look at all the TikTok videos, I mean, which is now banned, but, look at all the way they are kind of putting themselves out on Instagram. It is not just a metro and a big town phenomena. Look at the number of YouTube videos. Look at the kind of influencers who are coming today. So change is everywhere. Now, what happens sometimes is that advertising sometimes dramatizes this change to show that the change in women is coming at the expense of society. And the change in women is coming at the expense of her family. But if you go and see in real life, it is not the case. It is not that women want to rebel, leave their families behind and go and do something. I don't think you speak to, and study after study that has spoken to women say that we want a collective forward movement. I mean, a woman desires for her whole family to move forward, and she's part of that movement. She's not wanting to progress at the expense of her family, but at the same time, her family going ahead and leaving her behind is also not something that she's happy with. So when you talk of collective progress and women being part of that progress, I don't think that there is anything that will rub society the wrong way. And therefore, it is a certain sensitivity to the depictions. And women themselves don't like ads where they are shown as, being overly rebellious and kind of going against the family. Her women's desire for independence is not at the expense. And, progress is not, independence does not mean that she's separated from the rest of her family or society. She wishes for collective forward movements. And this has come to us time and time again, and women of all socio-economic classes, women of small and big towns. So yes, of course, if you have a particular audience, you may choose a situation which is, more relevant or more, from that woman's life. But progress is happening everywhere. So I don't think we can shut our eyes to the fact that just because she's from a small town or, is not very educated, that she has not experienced progress. Women are experiencing progress and they want to see themselves progress. That is common. That is not different for a large town, well-educated woman to a small town, not very well-educated person. I think study after study is showing the kind of energy and enthusiasm that, so I'll, recall an incident which happened maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. I was doing some research for another project, and I was meeting with these women in a small village outside the small town of Gaya in Bihar. And I mean, it was just astounding, their awareness of what is happening in the world, their exposure to ideas which we think are large town ideas. They know it. I mean, media has democratized access, has democratized aspiration. I mean, that is there everywhere. And, with social media, the ability for them to have a platform to express themselves, the fact that they can form communities and they are part of, a group. Earlier, sometimes women could feel isolated. Today, you are connected with other women, even if it's through a WhatsApp group, and that has its own set of energy. So I think those are the wings of change which are, across our country that are happening, which are undeniable. And, we cannot go back on that. So I would say that, there are lots of ways around this, and I don't think that, you may want to show a situation which is progressive for the woman audience that you're talking to. And I think that's always possible.
Thank you, ma'am, for answering that in so much detail. We have another question. Pankaj is asking, there was a controversy on an ad for the reason that the woman shown in the ad was not wearing a bindi on a festival. Was this the fault of ad makers to change the way we celebrate our festivals, or was it a push from the society on the independence of a woman to choose whatever she wants to wear? So that's a pretty long question.
Yeah, but it's an interesting question. I mean, what do we see bindi as? I mean, is bindi? I mean, what does a bindi mean? I'm happy to hear some of your responses. I'm very interested. I mean, why should anyone have a problem if a woman chooses or not chooses to wear a bindi? I mean, sometimes I may not wear a bindi. I mean, I would hate for someone to tell me what to wear and not what to wear. So, you know, so I think you have to stop telling women what they should do themselves. Let them decide. If she wants to wear a bindi, that's absolutely fine. If she doesn't want to wear a bindi, that's absolutely fine. If she's wearing a bindi, asking her to take it off is not okay. And if she's not wearing a bindi, asking her to wear it is also not okay. So it's, to my mind, a choice that the woman can make. It's her face. Let her decide what she likes to see herself as. And I think these are sometimes, you know, just needless controversies created by people, I think, who have very little work to do. You know, and you know, it's and I think it also points in some way to a patriarchal society where we want so much to control what the woman does and what she says and what she wears. I mean, why is that needed? You know, let's leave the women. They'll figure out what they want to wear, how they want to celebrate festivals, how they want to you know, work or not. I mean, let's leave it to the women. And you know, I don't think, honestly, these things are, I think, irrelevant, you know, to most women also. I mean, you know, it's like I said, I mean, these are people who are just kind of making controversies for the sake of it. I don't think anyone was offended other than the few people who, I mean, it is hardly a grave or widespread offense for someone to not wear a bindi. You know, it really should be no one's business, according to me.
Okay, so we have another question, and it's also about the gender roles again. So it's Tanya Devedi asked that Ariel urges men to share the load and do their share of household chores in its newest campaign, which aims to help women get their much-needed rest. Don't you think this is the high time to think beyond patriarchy and matriarchy and focus more on sharing different roles in the society? So another question on gender roles depiction.
No, I agree with you absolutely. And I think even the sharing of the load, sharing of the burden, sharing of household duties, etc. Again, you know, how do we normalize something like that, right? I mean, and I think that's again an attempt that a lot of advertisers have tried to do, where it's no big deal if, you know, if the woman is resting and the man is doing the laundry. I mean, you know, I mean, how does it make anyone less or more? I mean, by doing some things or not doing some things, I mean, where does the hierarchy come in? You are part of a family unit. You know, you're working together, you are doing your household duties together, you are a partnership. And I mean, even if, let's say, someone is shown doing a traditional role, someone is, you know, there is always division of labor. So I think, I mean, you know, not everyone can do everything, but then what you choose to do should not really depend on gender. I mean, it's absolutely fine if you know, a woman chooses to do banking and the husband chooses to laundry, or the other way around, if that's how they are comfortable doing and dividing things in their house. So I think that's what we are trying to say, that you know, doing things which were traditionally not done because of a gender issue today should just be a matter of convenience. You know, who's available, who can do it, and it should not be that because of your gender that you either do or not do something. It should be a matter of maybe what is convenient to that household, you know, who comes to the house at what time, what one's schedule is like. I think those are the, you know, perhaps more relevant factors in deciding who does what and, you know, how it should be done. I don't think any role particularly should be assigned to a gender. I mean, it should not. And it's the same thing, right? I mean, why can't a man look after kids, and why should a man always be shown bumbling when he's looking after kids or doing some household work? I mean, they can be equally adept at doing those things. You know, why show that they will always struggle and get things wrong? You know, so I think that's the kind of, I mean, that is what I would call progressive advertising, where you're able to show these things being done equally well, you know, by both partners. And it is not that, you know, men can drive and women can't drive. I mean, I think those are depictions that we should leave behind now.
Thank you, ma'am. So we are still open for question and answer. If anyone has still any query, any point of discussion, you can add to it.
Shai, if you don't have more questions, we can close now.
Okay, thank you, sir. So thank you, ma'am, for taking time out from your busy schedule and giving us an insightful lecture. And now, before we close the session, I would like to invite Professor Pramod Kumar, Dean Students Welfare and HOD Department of Outreach Activities, to propose a formal vote of thanks. Sir?
Thank you, Nisha. Thank you, Manisha ji, for sparing time for our students today. Basically, I had the opportunity to interact with Manisha Kapoor ji while we both were part of the Government of India's Empowered Group on COVID communication, and we have been attending meetings together for almost 2 years. The new ideas that she shared during those interactions were really meaningful, and those ideas were definitely appreciated. And I think majority of the ideas were implemented during the COVID strategy. She also, Manisha ji also joined the orientation program organized in IIMC last year in October, and her interaction was definitely was well received, and that was appreciated by all our students. Now today also she accepted our request. I basically requested her on Tuesday only, and she agreed for this interaction. Thank you, ma'am. And the information that you have shared with our students is definitely enlightening. You have explained what is shown in the advertisements and what should be shown. She has also explained she change model to imagine and evaluate depiction of women in advertising, and she also discussed progressive depiction of women. Thank you, Manisha ji, for sparing time today. Hope your association with IIMC will continue in future also. We hope we had basically 2-3 months back, we had discussed to organize special interaction in IIMC on advertising. But I think because of COVID situation, third wave of COVID, we could not materialize that idea. And I think we will be organizing that discussion in next month also. If Manisha ji, I think, starts a discussion in that direction, we can have that event next month also. And I think my task is incomplete without expressing my special thanks to our DG IIMC Professor Sanjay Dwivedi ji, ADG Shri Ashish Goyal ji, Dean Academics Professor Govind Singh ji, and Professor Sangeeta Panavendra ji, Professor Rakesh Goswami, Professor Anil Soumitra, Dr. Anil Vadavathur from Kottayam, Dr. Meeta Ujjain, and all other faculty members who have joined this discussion today. And my special thanks to Dr. Rachna Sharma, who has joined IIMC as Associate Professor, I think last week only, for welcoming the guest today. Thank you, Rachna ji. And Nisa Askari. Thank you, Nisa. She is Academic Associate in our Advertising and Public Relations Department. She has perfectly moderated this session. And I also thank to our IT and social media team as this interaction is going on. Our social media team has started posting different tweets on the social media, and the IT department has also managed everything perfectly. Thank you everyone for sparing time for this discussion. And next week we will meet with any other personality to interact on any different topic. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. It was absolutely my pleasure and honor to be here amongst all of you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Manisha.
Thank you.